The U.S. administration has repeatedly said the U.S. won. Iran's government went on TV and said they won. Both sides are throwing victory laps after the same war. So either one of them is lying, or winning this thing is way more complicated than either side wants to admit. What's going on? The war is in a weird in-between right now. A ceasefire technically kicked in on April 8th, but it's hanging by a thread. The Islamabad talks fell apart. Trump then canceled his own negotiators' follow-up trip. Iran's foreign minister is flying between Oman, Pakistan, and Russia trying to find some kind of deal. The US has a full naval blockade on Iranian ports. And the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil moves every single day, is still shut down. What is the goal? Well, here's where it gets messy because the goals keep shifting. At different points, the US administration said this war was about stopping Iran's nuclear program, wiping out its missile stockpiles, cutting off groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis, and the big one, toppling the Iranian government entirely. Netanyahu was more straightforward. Remove the threat to Israel for good. On the military side, they got a lot of what they wanted. Iran's missile launchers dropped 90% in the first week. The US says over 90% of Iran's navy is gone. More than 250 Iranian leaders were killed, including Supreme Leader Khamenei on day one. The nuclear program got hit hard. Facilities destroyed, the ability to enrich uranium set back by years. But the government is still there. A new supreme leader is already in place. The strait is still closed. Iran hasn't surrendered. Trump repeatedly declared victory while fighting was still going on, which tells you a lot about the gap between what they said they'd do and what actually happened. Realistically, there's about a 30% chance the US gets close to everything it wanted. An Iran that's too weak to recover for a decade and a strait that reopens on Washington's terms. The more likely outcome, somewhere around 55%, is a half win. Nuclear program damaged, military gutted, but the government still standing, and Iran slowly rebuilding with help from Russia and China. Iran's scoreboard. Iran never expected to win this militarily. That was never the plan. The whole idea was to take the hits, keep the government alive, and make the US pay enough of a price that nobody wants to do this again. By that measure, Iran is doing better than the raw numbers suggest. The government survived. A new supreme leader is in place. Even after everything the US and Israel threw at it, Iran still has around 40% of its pre-war drones and about 60% of its missile launch capability left. And the people who actually know how to build this stuff, the engineers, the weapons scientists, they weren't bombed out of existence. Iran can rebuild. It'll take years and money, but the knowledge is still there. The Strait of Hormuz is Iran's biggest card, and it's still on the table. Oil was sitting at $70 a barrel before the war. It shot past $119. The US blockade is hurting Iran badly, but a closed strait is hurting the whole world, and Iran knows that every week it stays shut. The pressure on Washington from other countries, from financial markets, from American voters at the gas pump, keeps building. Iran has basically made this a waiting game at the negotiation table, and it's shown it's willing to sit in the rubble longer than most people expected. The nuclear situation is also not as settled as the US wants people to think. Scientists at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists believe Iran is holding on to its remaining enriched uranium as a bargaining chip, ready to trade it away for the right deal rather than rushing to build a bomb. That's actually a stronger position than it sounds, because it means Iran still has something valuable to offer, which means it still has power in the talks. We might have a winner. Russia didn't fire a single shot and is probably coming out of this better than anyone. Russia built its entire 2026 government budget around oil at about $60 a barrel. The Iran war pushed it past $120. That one shift basically saved the Russian economy, giving the government the money it needed to keep funding the war in Ukraine right when the Western sanctions were supposed to be really squeezing it. One estimate put Russia's extra income from the conflict at around $161 billion. That's roughly $500 million extra every single day from a war it had nothing to do with starting. And it goes further than that. Russia was feeding Iran satellite information on where US ships and planes were during the conflict. A Ukrainian intelligence assessment confirmed it. And when CIA Director Ratcliffe was asked directly in front of the Senate whether Russia was actually providing that help, he said he knew the answer but would only give it in a classified session. Iran's own foreign minister said Russia was helping in many different directions. That help made Iran's strikes more effective than they'd been before. Now, Russia does have a downside here. Iran was its most important partner in the Middle East, and a badly weakened Iran is a less useful one. Russia also doesn't want the Iranian government to completely fall apart. A chaotic Iran with no clear leadership would be much harder to deal with in the current setup. So Russia wants Iran to survive, just not necessarily to fully bounce back. Right now, though, the money alone makes this an overwhelming win for Moscow. China, China, China. China's position is more complicated and more interesting. Publicly, China condemned the strikes, called for talks, and sent diplomats. It's been positioning itself as the responsible, level-headed party while the US looked like it was improvising. That's played well in a lot of countries that were already skeptical of US foreign policy. Behind closed doors, though, it's a very different story. US officials confirmed China was sharing location data with Iran through its Beidou satellite system. Chinese companies were selling radar parts and electronic equipment to Iran. Ships loaded with materials used to make solid rocket fuel left Chinese ports heading for Iran after the war started. The US actually intercepted one of them. China's foreign minister called the US naval blockade dangerous and irresponsible, which is unusually blunt for Beijing. The biggest thing China is gaining isn't any of that, though. It's information. China's military watched the US burn through thousands of air defense missiles in this conflict. It watched US forces get moved away from the Pacific. It's now updating everything it thinks it knows about what a fight over Taiwan would look like, where the gaps in American defenses are, how fast the US runs through weapons in a major air campaign, and at what point the numbers start working against Washington. Where China is actually losing, the closed strait is hurting its oil supply. China has about 104 days worth of reserves, enough to ride out a shorter conflict, but not forever. It gets a lot of its oil from Iran at discounted prices, and a destroyed Iran can't supply that. So China is winning the public image battle while quietly taking a hit on energy, which is why it's been pushing hard for a ceasefire even while helping Iran hold out. So, who's actually winning? Shooting war. US and Israel, not close. Economic fight, Iran's probably ahead on points. The strait is still closed, and so is any real deal. Long game? Nobody can call it yet, but that's the problem for Washington. The honest answer is that everyone got something and nobody got everything. The US won the war it planned for. It's losing the one it didn't. And the country that came out the cleanest never fired a shot, didn't lose a single soldier, just watched oil prices double and cashed the check. It's going to Moscow. If you want to see what happens if US troops enter Iran, watch the video you now see on your screen. Thanks for watching.